So my name is Jody. I'm the Director of Strategy for Scanning Pens. If you're unfamiliar with Scanning Pens, we are a global company who produces literacy tools that help all types of learners help improve their literacy and reading skills. And so today, we're going to talk a little bit about the Reader Pen and how it's been used throughout the country. And we're really delighted to have Candace here. Candace has, we've known Candace a long time. She's used them in person. She's an SLP and an AT specialist. And so I'm going to turn it over to her, and then I'll come back at the end. But I'll be watching for any questions you might have. Candace, over to you.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I know either some are still in school and some are out enjoying summer, but appreciate you guys taking the time to join us. So like Jody said, my background is in speech therapy. I spent about 20 years doing that and then moved into AT. And my passion's always been literacy, AAC, and AT. So I'm really excited to be doing this webinar with you guys today. Disclosures, I'm a salaried employee with Scottsdale Unified School District as an assistive technology specialist. I just joined them this past year. Before that, I was working in a nonprofit with adults with developmental disabilities. And let's see. So today we're going to talk about how the neurodiverse populations can use the Reader Pens to increase engagement and independence with reading activities. We're also going to talk about the importance of utilizing various reading modes in different contexts so we can build better readers, and go through some digital and text-based reading supports. And there's so much information as far as reading supports go. This is pretty much a short list, but I gave you a few resources to kind of start diving you down that rabbit hole. And let's see. Okay, so just kind of hitting that bang off the beginning, what the true cost of illiteracy is. It affects so many people worldwide. We're spending lots and lots of money on the overall impact of that. So, you know, how do we deal with crime and health, and literacy affects all of that. And personally, we know that affects employability, you know, especially with our developmentally disabled individuals, and, you know, those that are in poverty, lower social economic status. And literacy is such a lifelong skill that we need, and it's everywhere. So those are just some stats. I think I kind of blew through those pretty quickly. like you said, we'll have those slides. So we're going to talk a little bit about the science. I love Marianne Wolf and her books, The Proust and Squid and Reader Come Home. So when we talk about the reading brain, we're talking about a function that's not innate to our biology, like learning language. So if we place an individual in a language-rich environment, regardless of what language is being spoken, that person will eventually start speaking that language without much instruction. So that whole immersion piece. So if I'm going to go visit Japan and spend several months there, I'm eventually going to start picking it up. I might not learn to read unless someone's teaching me, but I can definitely learn the language. And that's what's really unique to us as human beings, is our brain's superpower of neuroplasticity. We're able to make new connections using existing structures, and you know, that can be shaped by experiences. So when it comes to reading, it really depends on the brain's ability to connect and integrate various sources of information, specifically visual with auditory, linguistic, and conceptual areas. And when there's exposure to reading, we experience new feelings, which prepares us to understand more complex emotions. And the more exposure, the more words and associations develop, which provides more experiences, conversations, and interactions with print. So a lot of that background information is from Marianne Wolf's books. They're great reads, easy reads. And her newest one, the Reader Come Home, is all about reading in the digital age and how that's affecting how we're learning. So when it comes to a shared responsibility among all educators, what is that shared responsibility? If you guys feel free to answer in the chat. If not, I'll answer it for us in a second. No takers? Okay. So a shared responsibility with all educators is language. Oops, got to change the button here. Oh no, I can't change it. Well, anyway, I'm supposed to take that box out and then it will say language and literacy. There we go, I just figured it out. Working through the webinar. And that's because language and literacy are not specific to language arts or English teachers. Every classroom demands literacy skills that require further development, strengthening, and enhancement for students to find success in all content areas. So when we focus on teaching print literacies, we're focusing on those lifelong learner needs to find employment and have greater control over life choices and connect with others. So as we progress in this presentation, we will address how learners, and by this I mean all, so those with individuals with developmental disabilities, dyslexia, and other struggling readers or learners, the one skill that promotes independence in life is reading. It's all around us, from stickers to menus, frozen food packages. So there's so much around us besides just reading a book or newspaper. So people have made it through life without the ability to read, with many limitations. But what happens when you go to a restaurant by yourself and you can't read and it's a text-only menu and you can't read it? You have to rely on others, whether that's the server to say, can you make a recommendation for me, and pray that they are going to recommend something that you're actually going to like. Or constantly order the same thing because you know what's familiar. So we can teach all those life skills, but without literacy, it's really lacking that meaningful component. All right. This slide is the Literacy Bill of Rights. Talking with Jody too, I haven't seen this out in print. It's in, it was originally created by Karen Erickson and David Copenhaver at the Chapel Hill University of North Carolina in their Literacy Disability Center. And then they also put it in as a table in their new book, Comprehensive Literacy for All. So I just kind of turned it into an infographic because it's nice to have that visual. And it's just really a meaningful piece to have, to throw up in your room or something. So it just goes over how we all need opportunities to learn, accessible text at all times, interacting with others while we're reading, making those life choices, and having lifelong educational opportunities. So even once we leave school, we're still learning, having knowledgeable educators and print environments. So like I said, having those menus and other things to practice on, and then positive expectations and attitudes. And we can make this available with the slide deck as well. So these are the 4 concepts we're going to address in this webinar. So the first one will be cognitive engagement. So that's that motivation. How do we get that intrinsic motivation going for someone to become a reader and enjoy it? Cognitive patience, TLDR, we'll go into that in a little bit. Active and passive participation. So even if we're not actively participating in every single lesson, there's still so much going on around us that everybody's kind of still paying attention to. And if you're a teacher, that you have those students that never raise their hand and are always quiet, but they're still learning. Repetition with variation. So same concept, different day, different way. A quick example of that is I was doing a reading curriculum with our adults in a day treatment or a day program. and we would spend 5 months on a book, which sounds like a really long time, but we would change up how we were using that book and all the different lessons. All right, so we're going to go over cognitive engagement. So how do we get learners to invest in their learning? How do we get them, how do we get struggling or passive learners interested in what they're learning in order for them to go from that shallow cognitive processing to deep cognitive processing? We want thinkers, we want analyzers. So as educators, or even as speech therapists and AT specialists, we need to evaluate ways to increase a learner's relationship to the content they're learning, and so we can increase that thinking and reasoning and judgment. So again, I'm going to refer back to Karen Erickson and David Copenhaver's book, Comprehensive Literacy for All. They state cognitive engagement leads to greater time on task, more positive, effective responses to reading and writing, and a greater depth of comprehension and learning. And then you also get more of that interaction inside school and outside school. And so this can be achieved through having that print environment, class libraries, regular student publication, and high levels of student interaction. So we're going to go through a couple stories of some individuals that have used the pens and some strategies to get them to become readers. So this is Melody. Melody, prior to COVID, attended a day program for adults in Phoenix, Arizona, and she would spend a majority of her day coloring. It was her favorite activity, and it was incredibly difficult to get her to do another activity outside of that when she was in her room. She's super sound sensitive and doesn't like it when people get in her space. So she really wasn't interacting a lot with some of the other individuals in her room. But she had her favorite. So we ended up getting a couple of pens per room and introduced the pen to Melody. And she was instantly a self-selected reader, or a self-directed reader. She has experience with literacy and phonemic awareness and some vocabulary skills. So she was probably considered like an early transitional reader. And that's a reader who can decode new words, has increased comprehension, reads with some fluency and speed, and she can understand emotion when she's reading. So although Melody could read independently, it would be at a level that wouldn't be considered age respectful. So meaning like she could read books in print, but maybe at a content level below her age. So, you know, like young reader type books, but her reading level, like what she could understand, was well above that. And that tends to happen a lot, especially with the adult side. So it was interesting kind of seeing that perspective, is that they have very little to no literacy instruction. And so they're still kind of, you know, learning the letters of their name and their alphabet, and not giving those opportunities to work with text that was appropriate to their age. So once Melanie had the pen in her hands, it was literally a game changer. It became her new obsession, and that took over coloring. So now we had, instead of prying the markers out of her hands, we were now trying to pry the pen out of her hands and share it with all the other individuals, because there was 2 pens in the room for about like 20 individuals. And we'll touch on how we got to expand on that as well. So she ended up reading through all the Harry Potter books on her own, and she was able to have a full discussion about the events and the characters. But before the pen, she could read independently, but wasn't excited about reading. And she didn't need to work up the courage to ask someone to read for her or to her. She could just go grab the pen and transport herself to another world. So it was pretty neat. So the other piece that was really exciting for her is that she would scan the text with the pen and then watch and listen as the pen highlighted the scanned text read back to her. So it was a really cool feature, because not only was she having to focus on the text to scan it, she was also looking at it and getting that visual and the auditory to really solidify the information she was reading. So she was truly interacting with that text. Okay. And this is Marlon. His quote is the best. It really kind of solidifies this whole concept of that everybody can learn to read. So he doesn't like it when people read to him. He wants to read on his own. I read with the reader pen every day on my books, and then you can read by yourself. So Marlon has some strong receptive skills and some good expressive skills, but he's pretty quiet and does struggle to express himself clearly and fully. But he couldn't read on his own. And you could tell by his quote, that was a real struggle for him. So it gave him the confidence and the independence to be able to read on his own terms. And he was able to engage in what he was reading. And it was his reading. So he had that he was able to identify with the books now. And he could choose what he was reading, whether it was a magazine or a book or whatever was in the room. All right. So as I said before, we figured out a way to get Melody to share that pen. So this is another great example of cognitive engagement where we had a group of adults sit around a table. They each grabbed a book of their own. So once we introduced the pens and the reading curriculum, they were going out to the public libraries and checking out books. They were going to Goodwill and getting different books. So instead of having young early readers, they were now having more age-respectful content in the rooms. And so this was an activity, if you can see in the picture, there's a little Bluetooth speaker in the middle of the table. And we plugged the auxiliary cord in from the pen to the speaker. And everybody went around taking turns reading with the pen. Now, it wasn't like considered like a true group read where everybody was reading the same book and they were discussing it. This was truly engagement where they were all just kind of taking turns reading the books that they got and sharing that way. And they loved it. So we had a couple readers in the group, a couple non-readers, but it was just a great way for them to interact. And like I said before with Melody, she had a very select few of individuals that she would interact with. So this kind of also expanded her group as well. All right, cognitive patience, TLDR. Hopefully my internet stays because I just got a notice. So if you don't know, which I'm newer to learning what this acronym means, it is, we'll stay on this one, too long, didn't read. So I'm sure you hear a lot of middle school and high school students say that a lot, even some adults. We've really become skimmers with everything being digitized and online for us. So there's, technology's booming. There's so many distractions to keep our focus, especially when reading. We have ads, we have sidebars, there's all these different things to keep our focus, plus people coming in and out of rooms and just all those other fun little distractions, checking your phones. So how many times do you catch yourself skimming through a web page or a newspaper article? Do you reread a line and still don't catch its meaning? Or do you actually sit down for pleasure and read or belong to a book club? So think about all those different ways that you read and what do you really retain and remember, so typically the science is telling us that when we sit and interact with text, so that's taking the time to actually read through, analyze, and process what we're reading versus skimming, we're having, better connection with that text. It's staying in our brains better. We're having, more emotional connection to it than if we're just skimming through. And granted, skimming is great for when we need to do it. So, and that's another valid point and growing concern from Marianne Wolf in her Reader Come Home book, is that with all the technology around us, we're not really taking the time to immerse ourselves in text. So when you find that great book and completely lose track of time and place because you were whisked away to that you were whisked away to that setting. I'm going to take a drink of water. So that inner voice is really vital to connecting with text, as it helps us understand those different emotions of the characters or analyze material to apply to our daily lives or work. But what about those struggling readers that cannot access text in print? We can slow down and take our time by listening to text, sitting with someone to engage in reading, like a shared reading or guided reading experience, or using assistive technologies to help us focus. But we really need to be reading with a purpose. That's that key piece. So this is an example of kind of taking that time. Just by looking at the picture, the student is using a scanning pen to read a test to help them really focus on the words, vocabulary. So like his quote says, sometimes we get stuck on a word and need help. So it's easy to kind of have that piece built in instead of having to go look for a dictionary and kind of figure it out, especially for those struggling readers. That's a harder skill to do. So like I said, here's a super short list of some helpful tools. If you're not familiar with them, great. If you are, even better. So the first one is Read and Write. That one's, and these are all Google extensions. So that's why they're web-based. So Read and Write there's a free extension version, but that one's pretty much just a screen reader. The premium version gives you this full toolbar that you're seeing up here. And I highlighted a couple of the icons that are helpful for getting that focus. So we have the screenshot reader. So you can just select text and it will start reading that text aloud to you, and it will highlight as it reads. So you're getting that visual and the auditory. There's a screen masking tool. So again, getting that focus. So and what I mean by that is, like, if we have digitized books or any type of text and it's on a screen, because we have all those other distractions, we really want to get that visual component to focus on so we can have that interaction. So the screen reader kind of like makes like a reader view bar. So it will go through and highlight certain text and then gray out other portions. So you can just highlight a portion that you want to read. And then another piece is simplifying. So you can take a website and you can simplify it to take out all those ads and everything. And it's just kind of like that reader view, like you would have on, whether you use an iPhone or Android, you have that simplified view. So these other extensions, again, are all free. The Read and Write Premium, as a teacher, you can sign up and get a premium version for free. But all these other ones are available and they're pretty awesome. So when we're talking about that cognitive patience, when we're reading on the web, we want to look at screen masking. So can we just highlight certain portions that we want to focus on, simplifying the pages, and then PDFs also become a challenge sometimes. So that screenshot reader is great for that. And there are other extensions that read PDFs. So ReadB is one that simplifies, and you could change font, you can change background, so you can play with those contrasts. Reader View is that simplified piece where it just takes all the clutter out. Again, you have options there to kind of play around with font and text and backgrounds. AT bar is very similar to Read and Write, except it doesn't have all those features. You can change, like you can do color overlays. So kids that need a certain type of contrast, you can have a red overlay, you can have a green overlay, you can do yellow, which really helps with those visual components. And then the screenshot reader by TextHelp, this one is a free extension where, again, like I said, you can grab any text on any page and now turn it into something that can be read. So I had a student that I trained to use this screenshot reader, and she had a social story as a PDF from like Teachers Pay Teachers on her Chromebook, and I taught her how to do it, and she was so excited because she could read it by herself. These are some app-based apps. again, kind of focusing on that audio portion with that visual component. So we're really getting that interaction. So Speechify does that. Pictello is more of like a storybook creator, but you can download EPUB books to it. And then it highlights as it reads to you, and it gives you some voice options. And then look into public libraries. There's some great tools there. Libby's great. Again, you can change those backgrounds and font sizes. And then you have the simplification with your tablets, whether it's iOS or Android. Okay. And then some paper-based ones. Obviously, we're going to highlight the ReaderPen. It's a great way to get that physical interaction with text because you're hitting every single sense at that point except for smell. But then there's some other things that you can use. You have the color overlays, page fluffers. So those would be for our early learner or emergent readers, or those that have any physical limitation but still want to interact by turning a page. Clothespins work. So that way it's not always like a permanent thing. These are popsicle sticks. So anything that they can, have that physical interaction. Talking dictionaries are old, but they're still around. The reading window. So that's kind of like that screen masking. And these are super simple to make on your own. You can just use like some black poster board or foam board and cut a little rectangle in them. And now you have your own little reader window. And then positioning aids are huge. Think about how many times you change positions when you're reading a book. Some like to lay down, some to, on their back, on their stomach, on their side, at a table. So there's all those different options. And then bringing that angle up sometimes really helps for those that are struggling to read. All right, active and passive learning. So what I mean by this is those, like I said, there's those students that just don't want to participate in class. They're not going to raise their hand. They're not going to ask questions. They may not even be asking for help, but they can learn through more passive learning. So whether they're given a project to do it in their own terms, and then they can present that information in a different way, they just don't feel comfortable or they're embarrassed to raise their hand because they don't want to be wrong or, they don't want to stumble while they're reading out loud or something like that, or they just need more time outside of the classroom to spend with the text. And then on the flip side of the active learning is getting those that are more neurodiverse to participate in reading activities. And so, like I said, we were doing a reading curriculum and we weren't expecting everybody to participate, but we knew that if they were in the room while we were doing lessons, they were getting something. And eventually it piqued enough engagement where they would start joining us in the lessons. So a great example of passive learning is Brina. So she has no vision, and she was pretty tactilely defensive. So she was learning Braille for a little bit, but was really struggling because she didn't want to touch it. If you gave her a book with Braille on it, she would just rip it up and throw it. Same with the pen at first. She didn't really want to hold on to it either. And it'd be really challenging for her to scan text. We've tried, a couple tactile cues for that, but again, she doesn't want to touch stuff. So we use the recording feature, and she loves nursery rhymes. So that was our buy-in. We recorded nursery rhymes on there, spoken. We didn't copy it from, like a song or a YouTube channel or anything like that. So we spoke it in there, and then we started expanding on from there and adding in her directions for the day, because, transitions are really difficult. We're constantly having to verbally prompt. So we were able to put her directions on there to transition, and she could do it on her own independently to get herself ready to transition to the next activity or to another room. And then we also were able to kind of put books on there as well, just, some short ones that we could speak in to put on in as a recording. And then she had other options. She could listen to audiobooks. Obviously her nursery rhymes on YouTube and that type of thing. So we were able to get more literacy opportunities with her. And another feature too is scanning into the computer. So you can use the pens to scan into Docs or Word. And then from there, you have those immersive readers built into all the Microsoft apps. And, Google has a lot of extensions that has all of that built in as well. So it's one way, again, to kind of expand on what the students are doing, so they can take that time to scan, or you can have another student scan. So might not be a struggling reader, but they might need a little bit more focus on the text. So they can scan it in for the student that is struggling. And now the other student has that text available for them to read it in different ways. And these are all little screenshots from the scanning pen videos, which we'll link, have a slide that links all of those to them too, so you can watch those in action. Again, the active passive participation in the classroom, what it might look like. This is an inclusive classroom in New York of I think it's 4th and 5th graders. So you can see some are using the pens, some are not, some have headphones. So they're all kind of doing their own thing, and you can tell that they're all engaged and they're all actively learning. And then another great quote from this young lady, Brianna, to, again, the students who don't like to raise their hand, it gives them that opportunity to kind of learn on their own. And then when they do have that confidence, they can participate in the classroom. And then that quote from the teacher, "I can now spend time with the whole class engaging my students in more meaningful discussions and reading comprehension." So students who don't normally understand the text fully, reading it independently with the use of the pen can now understand the text and see the smiles on their faces when they're proud to raise their hand. So it does really increase that independence and confidence. Okay, repetition with variation. If we have any speech therapists on here, then, and if you're familiar with Dr. Caroline Musselwhite, this is probably one of her biggest things that she mentions in all of her presentations. So like I said, when we were doing that reading curriculum, we spent 5 months on a book, which was a little extensive, but it was just when we could get in there to work with everybody. But we were, do a video lesson. We would do word work. So we'd work on phonemic awareness, alphabet awareness. We would do closed sets where we're talking about geography and timelines. And this was Don Johnson's Readtopia curriculum, which was really great. So let's see. The use of assistive technology and tools that support language comprehension and acquisition while the student continues to develop reading skills plays a vital role in closing the gap to reading. So these are, I did a little word cloud with some reading strategies that we could use with all learners. These are primarily used for individuals with significant reading disabilities. So we have anchor, read, apply, before, during, after reading, comprehension, shared reading, getting that inner voice. So it's just fun to kind of put it together in that way. So here's a great example of repetition with variation. This young man, Nate, was attending a private school, and they had the pens, and then he also went on to the adult program. But he actually snagged a pen from the classroom one day because they were doing this obstacle challenge, and he wanted to read the text on the sign. So instead of saying, "Hey, I need help with this," he just snagged a pen, took it with him, and read the words on the sign so he could pick which obstacle he wanted to do and understand what he needed to do to complete that obstacle. They can also be used to read nutrition facts on the side of a box, or the directions for a frozen meal, menus, checkbooks, anything where it will fit within that little window. So all those opportunities are there. And so it's just thinking beyond those basic life skills of, you know, we would typically, if we're teaching an adult like a life skill of making a meal, we're going to walk them through the steps to do that. But think about if we can, you know, whether we scan those directions so they can use an e-reader or use the pen or something else that can give them interacting with that text on that box so they can really understand what they're doing on top of learning the steps. AAC and literacy, nothing takes more patience than modeling and supporting a learner using AAC. And literacy is such a huge component of learning an AAC device. The symbols have meaning, but there's a ton of research stating that there's detrimental effects of like pairing symbols with text, like if you like rebus stories. It's a little different with AAC because we're trying to get that communication piece. So even just using, like, say you have a student with just a paper-based AAC flipbook or something like that, they would require a communication partner, which they should have, but there's also an important part of having that self-directed exploration with a communication device to learn it a little bit more on their own. And it's really hard to do that when you have a paper-based book and you don't have somebody telling you what those are as you're learning them. So again, because we do incorporate text with the symbols, you could use the pen or something else to, you know, whether you scan it up, like using your notes app on your iPhone or something like that, to read those and kind of make it a little bit more digital, just to kind of explore that piece. Not saying that like that's the way to communicate, but again, just to kind of have that interaction with that communication book a little bit more. So just having that piece of multiple contexts, multiple communication partners, and for a variety of purpose. Again, that's from, Karen Erickson and David Copenhaver. And that book just came out. It's a really great read, so I highly, highly recommend it. Another option of repetition with variation, again, building those home and classroom libraries. So having just so much variety of text around that you can just grab and read. There's that scan and store feature with the CPen Connect. So, you know, you could read the text, we can scan it, I can save it into an iPad app, I can translate it, and I can go back and reread it whenever I need to, because that other time with text is really important too. So reading things multiple times. And if we talk about like the home libraries, we're looking at, you know, we want magazines, articles, they can be digital, they can be in print, and having just a wide range. Even picture books for adults are great because you can sit there and talk about them, but just having that interaction. And here I have an adult who was struggling to use the pen, but really wanted to read this book that coincided with the curriculum that we were doing. So I made her a little, kind of like a reader view guide to kind of get the pen in there. And so we'll watch this little short video because her reaction at the end is the best. Let's see. Gotta back it up because we played it earlier. So yeah, just super excited to do that. We'll get back to that. And as you can see, like I gave her a little start and an end, so she knew she had to start at the beginning of the text and go to the end of the text. And then I also gave her some cues of watch and look at the pen and listen. So just another alternative way to get her reading, because she wasn't reading on her own, but she really wanted to get this mastered. And here's Stephanie. So Stephanie is a piece of inspiration. She is in an employment program, learning those skills to eventually get hired. She works at a no-kill animal shelter in Phoenix called Home for Good, and that's for FUR. It's really sweet. So she was being taught the routine to do her job, and she was getting really close to being hired by the company, but she was still requiring a lot of prompts to get through the whole routine. And reading was really a barrier for her because she couldn't do it independently. So again, we introduced the pen to her, and she was able to kind of go through her checklist on her own. So that way, like, if anything changed, she would pick up there was something new. And Stephanie was so quiet. we could barely hear her when she talks. And so after using the pen a couple of times and getting familiar with it and with her or the documents that she needed to do her job, she just lit up and came completely out of her shell. She started talking to us more and advocating for herself a little bit more. And it was just really amazing, the things that she was able to do once she got some more of that literacy. I mean, now we weren't teaching her, phonemic awareness or letter sounds or anything like that. But just the fact that, she could listen to it and understand the words on the page for her to be able to complete her duties at her job was huge. So it was one step closer for her to be getting hired. And again, this was all pre-COVID, so I'm not exactly sure where she is right now. Here's an example. I was talking about those classroom and home libraries. So it's a little mix of different types of text to kind of keep in your libraries and some different strategies. So wordless text and videos for those emergent learners or those individuals that struggle talking about stories and stuff like that. Wordless text and videos are awesome because there is no text, so you have to kind of think about it. So it kind of works on building that pre-analyzing piece. Simplified text, again, just getting it on the individual's reading level, but still making sure that it's age respectful. So, we want someone who's in their 40s to be able to read like the New York Times, but they might read at like a third grade level. There are websites that can alter the reading level and simplify it. So that way they are still reading that article, but at a level that's more their speed. Repeated lines. So those are, again, we're going to see more of that with our younger kiddos, like Eric Carle books and stuff like that. Poetry is awesome. Those just right books. So those are the ones where we can figure out that they meet that age requirement, but also the content requirement and reading ability for our individuals. Having picture walks and book talks, listening and discussing, working on that background knowledge so we can build that vocabulary development and understanding. And one I forgot to mention earlier about having that emotional connection with text is when we talk about text, commenting on it. So as a group, you can have a passage or a chapter, short chapter, and we're going to comment on that chapter, whether it's like, I like it, it was awful, and then making connections. Like, so say you're talking about a certain character that, maybe the character's a brother. Okay, so who has a brother? Tell me about your brother. Let's make that connection. And again, that's something that can be modified from, our early learners all the way up to our adults. All right, and then here's just another little snippet of extra resources. These are all live links. So even though it's in PDF form, they do work. We did double check that. So these are some live links to kind of send you down that rabbit hole of some other assistive technologies that will help with reading. Rewordify is great. That's one that kind of simplifies everything, and you can change the level. Don Johnson's Snap and Read is another great alternative to Google Read and Write. They do also offer some free trials on that one as well. And I didn't mention anything about writing, although literacy, reading and writing go hand in hand, but we're just focusing on that reading component today. So book creator, so writing your own books or simplifying a book for a student. It's great for making social stories. So any of those components are awesome. And then we have Cami and Jamboard, and then all those other built-ins with the text. So that immersive reader, your notes app on iOS scans documents that you can now save to read later. Looking at open dyslexic fonts and keyboards that you can install on your devices. And then all those, Google and Microsoft are really doing an awesome job with their accessibility features. And then for math, Equatio is another really good one where it reads for you. So, because math is another, one of those content areas where there's a lot of literacy and language involved. All right, so I'm gonna send it back to Miss Jody. So again, some references that I used to kind of create this PowerPoint for you guys today. You can dive into those.